And from a budget perspective, it's really a question of looking at the faculty-student ratio overall. This should really count. That said, I know a lot of people will be nervous if students get more choices and their courses are not included in the batch from which students are choosing. But from what I see, most of the courses, they're carrying their own enrollments with the market, whatever that student market is at this point in time, and probably would continue to do so under a different model. So I don't think many of those courses will lose much. My principal concern at the moment is that students are not getting enough choices for free electives, that with everything crowded in so much between a large gen ed program and growingly large majors, there's not much room for a student to experiment. And I think one of the neatest things about leaving high school and going to university is you get a chance to take a subject in a course you've never heard about, never seen before, and can actually experiment with some things. And we're not leaving enough room for that kind of radical free thinking that a student needs to have somewhere in their degree program. So I also applaud WASC's decision to concentrate less on the introduction of the student into the material and much more on the abilities of the student when they graduate. I've been a big fan of the Bologna model for a while, which stresses more the attainment of certain skills and abilities within the major and across the board, rather than whether you have 2 English 101 courses or 3 English 101 courses. So I look forward to this discussion. It should have no relevance to jobs. And I also see this as a key to changing the teaching load. Because I don't think we have to stay on everybody teaches 4 courses if we can use some imagination in curriculum design and in the development of the physical plant. One of the things I'm trying to do is get some larger spaces so that on occasion it would be better to teach in a larger room, teach the course once, and then break up into sections. But until we really get a good handle on Gen Ed, it's pretty hard to see how the rest of this fits in. In my view, 40 or so courses in Gen Ed is way out of what I've ever seen any of the accreditors recommend. So I'm surprised to see it got that big under WASC's direction, because I also think you do have to have enough time to really spend in the major. That's where a lot of really tough skills are honed within the majors. So you don't want to cram the major down. So I really think you have to look at the balance between Gen Ed, some free electives, and the needs of the major. And the major's the hardest one to change, obviously. It's all these damn scientists and others that keep adding to the major, I guess. Sorry.
Well, I'd just like to add, too, as we move into department chairs being more in charge of managing the teaching load for their departments, that's where the flexibility will come in at that management level. Look at the overall ratio, but the people on the ground are going to be at the faculty and department chair level. We're not reducing grades by 1. The number of courses required to graduate, so the number of courses will have to be taught. So it's a question of looking at the electives that students are now, if we reduce the number of gen eds, now be able to choose. So I think that the total number doesn't decrease. In fact, the requirements are going to be more or less the same.
Yes.
There's one more angle in on fear that maybe you could speak to, which is the future of programs. And even though I know that you and I had a conversation last year about how if we did eliminate programs, there would be a really thoughtful process and criteria and analysis, that things get sort of thrown around about, oh, that's such a small program. And I think there's fear in this school in some of the programs that are smaller. It goes way back to this idea that Gen Ed was the bread and butter of the programs that didn't recruit large numbers of majors. And it was a way that you could make sure you survived at HBU with your program. And I don't know if there's anything you can add to what we've said about elimination of programs at some future time, but for streamlining, you know,
I think we need some streamlining, and I think that, you know, that it was individual personal defense I think people went for these courses for rather than save a program. But looking at the mix of programs, we do seem to have started a lot of things that were deliberately going to be small, that could be pieced together, and I almost feel like I could hear the argument, somebody saying, if we add this program, we'll only need to add 2 courses. And 15, 20 years later, you end up with an awful lot of complexity in the programs. Let me give you an example of something a little different. I went to do my undergraduate degree in New Zealand. It's a 3-year program. We had to take 9 year-long courses to graduate. Each department taught a highly imaginative mix of History 1, History 2, and History 3. You had to do 1 discipline to stage 3, 2 to stage 2, and the rest you did for 1 year. So 9 courses made a degree. We probably have 1,200 courses in our inventory, right? Now, I think some choice is really good, but do we really want to make it that complicated and hard for students? One of the things that admissions people on the mainland said, students are saying to them, is could you give us less choice in the first year? We don't really know what we're heading in to do. And the smaller set of clearly required things that represent what you think is important would make it much easier for us to consider selecting the institution. So I think sometimes just simplifying it and putting our energy into research centers, other things than just generating more programs made out of the same basic set of courses may enable us to stop the churn that we live on here.
So if I could just, one of the things that we've been working on kind of early in this process is looking at some core subjects and identifying those. I think that probably addresses some of that. You know, the students don't want as much choice. They want to be able to. But let me take up something else. I'd like to know, I know, Jeff, you talked about how the humanities are the core of the institution of a university at your inauguration and at the first faculty convocation. And if you could outline or give us some ideas about what your vision for the general education might be, that'd be great.
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm happy to talk about the centrality of the humanities, but my vision of Gen Ed is really no more relevant than anybody else on faculty. This has to be a collective sense of what we think students should know and be able to do. So I think this is the case where the president shuts up on personal opinions about something like that and says, this is a collective decision by the faculty as to what you think is important for students to know and to be able to do. I'm happy to join in as one, but I don't want to make proclamations about what's right.
Then I did have another question, and
Okay.
it's
I'll try to answer.
yeah, yeah. We're hoping you're going to answer this one, and that's the question of resources that Malia mentioned earlier. I mean, we're envisioning some innovative things for this Gen Ed. For instance, team-taught courses or an interdisciplinary courses, and these things are going to take resources. There are other things about it that'll take resources as well. If you want to design an interdisciplinary course with several faculty involved, you have to have, you have to have planning time. You have to have the support of the administration to actually implement a course like that, because how are you going to handle course load, that kind of thing. What we really want is a partnership with the administration in terms of the general education, and the willingness of the administration to put some resources behind the planning and the implementation of this Gen Ed. If we can get that, I think we can design a very interesting general education. But I mean, things like marketing the general education. If we create a really innovative general education, And I think it would be fantastic if the university would market that as a part of the kind of the branding of the institution.
If we have something we can be proud of, we will market it.
Yeah,
if
okay.
we have something that's so diffuse that it's difficult in the marketing, then we really couldn't. I mean, it would be very hard to market the current Gen Ed program because it is so diffuse.
Right.
A simpler program would make it much easier. And without getting weaselly on the resources side, some things don't cost much to do better.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't cost much, for example, for a group of faculty members teaching 4 courses in similar topics to schedule the courses at the same time. So students might be able to register for a course in a certain region of the world and be able to take 4 courses in the same general subject area at once. I've seen that, and that didn't cost any money at all. I think we need to look carefully at team teaching. But if you take the element being that we really, our economics are driven by the student-faculty ratio, then if each person is supposed to be teaching 4 courses of 25 students, that's 100 each, and we're not there. We're probably more like 60 to 65 students. So as long as we're teaching the same average, what difference does it make from a budgetary perspective?
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I think part of what John is referencing is that we have wanted to do creative things in the past, and we just have not had support, particularly, to be blunt, from the dean level. And so what it's going to take is for you and Andy to kind of reach down and kind of open up a few minds if
Flexibility.
to do something.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be happy to even lay out some models of things which I think leave us in the, you need some planning time, but leave us in the same position as we go down the line and allow for interdisciplinary teaching.
Yeah, and to be further blunt, in the past, part of the argument against us doing interdisciplinary courses, quite frankly, has been the attitude of the deans that this is just some way for the faculty to slack off and not teach their full load. So we really want to put an end to that sort of attitude, because those of us who taught interdisciplinary classes, or at least have tried to, know there's an incredible amount of work, at least in the first setup and the first couple of years doing it. So that sort of attitude that the faculty are lazy bums is going to be a bit tired, I think, from our perspective. So we'd really like a change in culture on the part of the
So you're going to
administration.
stop being lazy bums then?
No, we already stopped doing that. But we're all talking about cultural change, and the faculty know that the cultural change has to come from us as well, but we'd like some of that to come from the administration too. And that's not pointing fingers, obviously, you, because you're new and we're going easy on you. But it is pointing fingers. It is pointing fingers at other members, quite frankly.
Yeah. I will say one thing. I think the worst thing you could do is tell everybody they have to teach 4 courses each semester and no more than 25 students in a course, because you stifle all sorts of creative opportunities to talk across college, talk across programs, and figure out what students need. Maybe you're better off with 100, 150 students in the room getting a dynamite lecture, and then breaking up into sections. In the sciences, I think marine science programs master's students should be getting some teaching fellowships.
As a past dean,
Yeah, it's a lazy past dean. Sorry.
we actually did a few different things that worked out okay, and I think as we move, but I want to, so besides in my own defense, I think that we need to look at that department chair role again, and then we have to look at that coordination across the department at the department chair level, because that's really where those decisions are going to have to be worked out in detail. And I think when we talk about teaching faculty-student ratio, we're also talking about something that is over a department or a college over time too. So I mean, we need to think in terms of that type of flexibility also. We've routinely taught a few courses in a team manner, the team teaching manner in the sciences, and we actually have some graduate students teaching some of our labs in partnership with a faculty member, where the faculty member does the first hour of the lab and the students will finish the lab off, as it were. So a lot of these things can be done, and since I'm the last sitting dean anyway that was around here, I think we have room for some growth.
Yeah, I know. I know there's an institutional culture
Yeah. Yeah, we've been.
Yeah. And he had a little bit easier sitting at the other side of the hill. Nobody could see him as easily. So these guys experimented.
You don't have to go back too far in our history to see that our deans, at least from my perspective, seem like glorified department chairs.
Neither will us.
And we still have some issues with people in the dean ranks occasionally, so just going back historically, I'm not criticizing anyone, really getting their fingers sort of dirty with some curricular issues which seem inappropriate. And I think the clarification of the role of the people in the dean ranks is necessary. And if we have real resources that are down at the department chair level, then you have this limited resource that you have to allocate. And if you got a problem with the way that the boss is doing it, well, next time that person's up for re-election, at least. I mean, that's one of the real issues is the faculty influence over the curriculum has not been that great here simply because no influence over resources.
Yeah. This was one of the issues we faced looking at the handbook, which is it was difficult to figure out any procedures that we could lay out that would be fair and even-handed without similar structures through the institution. And making strong department chairs, in my view, is even more important than the deans, because if you have strong department chairs, the deans will be strong by definition. So I think that's where the administrative rubber meets the road, is at the department head level. So I concentrate a lot there. I mean, the deans weren't given a lot of control because, I mean, first of all, they didn't have budgets. Without a budget or a knowledge of what the budget is, the only thing you could ask for was permission. And that's really what we're coming out of. So I think a lot of this is we need to revise Gen Ed, we need to revise the departmental and decanal structure, we need to revise the budget structures, we need to revise the faculty handbook, we need to implement faculty development procedures, and we need to get some residence halls, and we need to get some technology, and we need to get the student retention rate right in about 14 months. Other than that, but those seem to be the major issues. I agree with a lot of it's the administration was claiming more than it could manage.
From other organizations is when people feel distressed that they don't have resources, but when you say, what do you want or what do you need? Well, I asked the dean and I never heard back from them. And when I got moving with things here at HPU, my first encounter with Phyllis Fruse was she said, I'd love to start a film series. And I said, well, we should write a proposal. And she says, well, what would you put in there? You know, I mean, it was kind of like that wasn't her world to write proposals. Well, we wrote the proposal, we wrote the budget. Guess what? We have a film series that's still going on. And then we did that, that was done for the Common Book, although I wasn't part of that. Then we did the first year seminars. We didn't just go to Dr. Fleckless and say, we just need more resources to do this. You know, we found a matching grant, we wrote a budget, we made it a formal request, we got people to sign on who said, yes, I will teach. And I think that if we could build a model for innovation within this Gen Ed resource picture that said, you can have an innovative idea, it would only apply to maybe you and some other one or two teachers. You can go in for an innovation support for a particular kind of experimental venture. We could do some of our innovation through small demonstration projects while we're designing an innovative Gen Ed that's going to go forward in a more general way. And I would love to see some pocket of resources that was dedicated to innovation that way.
I think the small innovations are an excellent idea. The other thing is, we've got a lot of people here who are very good at writing grants. All the resources don't have to come from inside. I mean, typically, we can go to NEH, we can go to foundations and others. If we've got, especially something we want to try out, small grants from foundations are often really good ways to do that. So we're trying to strengthen the number of grant writers in the main office, but we've got a lot of faculty members who are perfectly good grant writers and know how to persuade foundations pretty well.
And demonstration projects are often the evidence you use in a proposal so that they think you have a half a brain about what it is you want funding for. And if you come in cold and just say, we have this idea, we think it'll fly. It's not as powerful as something supported by a prior demonstration project, small scale, that the institution supports.
We're beginning to identify some foundations who are saying, where have you been? So Hearst, for example, just said, give us an application for something that's a priority for about 100,000. So we put something together for Hearst. But there's a bunch of foundations in California that used to support Hawaii and still have it on their list, but we haven't been to see them for years. So I think the other thing we can do is look at some of these things. If they're imaginative and marketable, let's get some demonstration projects going, try some things out, and assess what works and what doesn't. Go on from there.
What we found in our field trips was heavy institution of professional development. Like at Punahou, they started a lab school where they actually have ongoing classes for their existing teachers as well as outreach for other teachers. And then we went to St. Andrews Priory, and they said that that's the number one thing. We talked to the students there, and they said relationship to faculty is most important. So I think in our creative process, that's one thing that is really critical for us in developing this, because we all say that the best teachers should be teaching in Gen Ed, you know, or at least we should have everyone become the best that they can be with the resources that we need in order to develop them in that way is important and critical. So is that something that you're talking about, like writing a grant to provide for this professional development?
With the Punahous of this world, our mistake is we let our tuition fall below theirs. And we're trying to run a university that charges $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 less than the high schools that we'd like to recruit from. So we starved ourselves too much in that case. But yeah, I mean, we can do that. There are some other things to look at too. One of the things I liked best at my last main stop at Butler was that the faculty got together and wrote a common course and decided they didn't want it to be a first-year course because they felt that students didn't have the writing and other skills they needed to address some higher-level topics. So they invented a course called Change in Tradition, and it looks at 5 different societies at critical points of transition. And the sections, which are kept to about 20 students, are taught by people from all disciplines. So you talk about the amount of work you have to put in to get 30 faculty members who will consistently teach outside their field in a multidisciplinary course. It was a huge effort, but it's been going for 15 years now. And while students complain at the time, it's the only thing you hear about at alumni events now. Because it's the one thing they all had in common, right? All remembered Roman transition or the Industrial Revolution, and they remember that some of these things were taught by a biologist and some by a chemist. So having something in common is another way to sort of simplify Gen Ed and keep lots of jobs, but be prepared to teach outside your field of interest, but inside the area of student need. Sorry, you were trying to get through that.
I want to get back to the nuts and bolts reason I think of why we asked you here. We understand, I think, as a faculty that Gen Ed is our responsibility and that we need to create something new because what we have is overly complex and has some problems. I think we get that. But it's quite challenging. The models that are out there there's many of them that we can start to think of how we're going to base it, how we're going to base ours, what kind of changes we're going to make. But I think in terms of what we need here to make this a really productive meeting is to get a sense of what, from your perspective, the administration's stake in the Gen Ed is. And let me explain to you why I say that. It's going to help us create it because I'm assuming if we came to you with, or if we came to the faculty with a Gen Ed that had 60 lower division credits and 20 upper division credits and the faculty passed it, I'm sure you guys would not accept that because it's ridiculous, right? So I think there are some important questions that we have about what are some of the boundaries that we have, not boundaries, but what's the admin's needs so that we can create something that will sync with that, I think, very productively so that we can be more efficient because it seems like there's a timeline here and we need to know probably what that timeline is. If it's 14 weeks, then that's important.
No, the timeline that I was quoting, 14 months, was really when we need to start getting our WASC report done. But we looked at this the other day and we did a Venn diagram. I don't have it with me. To try to look how much of the hours do we think should be reserved for Gen Ed, how much for the major, and how much for unrestricted electives. And that's what I would find highly acceptable. And we can change that. But room that you can still do some of these electives. And that may mean in some cases pushing back on the major, and that's going to be long and hard effort, because in a field like nursing, I don't think that we can. I don't think there's room to push that major back because they're so strictly controlled by CCNE. So no matter what we do as a general,
We can.
Yeah.
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 A little,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But not as much as, you know, the rest of the colleges,
Right.
but they're working on it.
Yeah.
Well, that would be very helpful as a concern that I have, because, I mean, some folks in the group that I'm with is I made clear that, in my view, the Gen Ed should be still delivering a lot of what we associate with liberal arts, that foundational thing. And I found that in not all the professional areas, but in some of the professional areas, their sense of what liberal arts is are service classes, or classes that are exclusively skills courses. And I emphasize that in my view, those skills courses are prerequisites to getting what is more important in liberal arts, which is very traditional in a way, but very contemporary looking forward, which is Aristotelian. It has to do with the cultivation of an individual, all the way up through autonomy, I would think, in the modern age, from self-discovery to autonomy, and then citizenship, which now is global rather than the polis. But what I have is an awareness that there are professional areas like nursing and I guess health and various things where they're very limited in terms of the number of credits they can allow to give. And I don't know what that is. That to me, that's a number behind a screen. If I had a sense of what that was, I could do something more.
That's why we try to do the Venn diagram, so to say, this seems like a reasonable balance, but we can work around it in different circumstances. But I agree with you that there's a tendency for the professions to look on the liberal arts as get your writing course and a couple of other things out of the way. Personally, I favor things like writing and speaking across the curriculum.
Well, me too.
Because then everybody has to stay engaged in it. Because the other piece of research we see is that a student who gets better in the first year because they've been getting the English 101 course write worse by the time they graduate than they did when they came in.
And that enables the development without having to take that many credits out of the major.
Yeah, it just says build this into some other courses. So chemistry department should have at least one course in which there's a writing intensive requirement or a speaking intensive requirement. Then you're dealing with the content and the skills at the same time. And we should be able to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think we have lost sight of something that students in a way haven't lost sight of, which is this is about their moral and intellectual development. It's not just about getting the credentials to get to the first job. What we're teaching them probably in many cases won't be that much use in the first job. It's going to be useful later and for navigating through life. I would take the case up with any of the health professions. The language ability, especially for other groups, is critically important if you're going to treat people. You know, it's not much point being in Texas and not being able to speak Spanish and expecting to be in a hospital and deal with the healthcare needs of people. The ability to have empathy and understand how to talk about life and death is as important as which pill to pop. And I think students enjoy that kind of topic.
There is one area where we're going to need your help. I'm sorry, Eric. And that's in the issue of majors that have poached into the Gen Ed which is what happens currently. I mean, like environmental science 3000, that's in the gen ed, but it's also in the major. And there's a lot of instances of this where the majors put their courses into the gen ed because they all wanted a piece of the gen ed. And we got to stop that. We got to pull that out.
You know, as I look at the packets that you had there to drop the courses into, it looked to me like it was a political compromise from day one. And therefore, the only way you can expect people to behave rationally is to try to drop their courses into here to get the enrollments. What we need to do is, this is where we go back to Nancy's question, is this program worth supporting? If it's worth supporting, we should continue to support it. We shouldn't say the only way for this program to succeed is to pirate gen ed credits.
I'll change what I was going to say previously to build on this. And a lot of courses in the sciences that were dropped into gen ed weren't dropped in to get enrollment. They were dropped in to save the major because the gen ed was so bloated that we couldn't have sent our students to graduate school because they wouldn't have had the graduate schools wanted if we had to cut that classes.
We didn't have enough physicists to teach the physics.
Well, no, I know, but the classes were full.
And some are automatic substitutions when you take biology, if all students should have it. We do need to think about what, maybe take a step back at this point, think of what gen ed, along with the rest of the degree, is supposed to achieve. Going a little bit off what Wayne was talking about, but let's think about some of the things that the students should have when they graduate. And I say let's think about that because WASC is going to has told us what some of those things are. So as we move in that direction, and the direction that WASC is taking is the direction that the federal government's taking also. So we need to see, and this, I don't think this will restrict the gen ed thinking in any way, but let's at least remember what it is that WASC thinks the students should have when they graduate in terms of their, what are they calling them now? I forget.
Core competencies.
The core competencies. And so we should see how, however the gen ed is constructed, whatever courses are in it, that they add to that aspect, and then we can assess that and tell WASC this is where some of this is coming from. So it doesn't all come from the majors.
I think it does help to look at some of those core competencies because there's a tendency at times to think content, subject matter, knowledge of, who's the Prime Minister of Poland today, rather than think about core competencies. But if you listen to the employers, they're fairly straightforward. We want somebody who can think critically so that if we ask them to write a business plan, they know what industry we're in and how the world is being shaped and how to think about this industry and this business. Oral communication about is important in both of those because about 75% of all jobs now are jobs in the persuasion field. It almost doesn't matter where you are. So without critical thinking, without good writing skills and good oral delivery skills, these kids are going nowhere. I mean, they're not even going to get a job interview the way a lot of them write. So, one of the reasons I'd like to see it simplified is we're doing some very sophisticated things to some people who have some very simple needs. It might be better to think about not trying to be quite as exotic in all of these cases and just go back to some tried and tested bread and butter solutions to make sure that at least everybody who gets a bachelor's degree can write a 10-page essay, isn't scared of reading a book, and might actually have read some while they're in college and can write a long paper and can proofread it themselves without depending on WordPerfect to see if the word exists. I don't think people are asking for much, but I also think in a lot of cases they're not getting much with recent college graduates.
I think Wayne was talking about the extreme of focusing on skills courses. We've really had lots of occurrences, I think, of the split in both directions. I teach content, I don't have to teach that. My area right now is quantitative reasoning, so there's no reason why in almost any discipline you can't have a content course that deals with something in which people have to talk about some kind of quantitative reasoning as part of the learning process. We can embed these core competencies into courses that are so-called content courses. So I'd like them to also, in response to what you were saying, Jeff, say, and not be scared of a standard deviation either, or a comparison of percentages. I mean, these are pretty simple, basic operations, and yet we don't do that except in a stats course.
Yeah. I mean, one test would be if we had learning objectives embedded in all the courses, so we didn't just say, oh, quantitative reasoning, I do some of that in my course, so my course should be in that box. But instead say, what do you mean by quantitative reasoning? Is it built into the objectives of the course? Is it assessed?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I don't think we have to keep making up new courses for each of these. When we look across the range of courses we've already got, we must be covering most of it already.
I think we might need somehow or another, through one mechanism or another, faculty agree, and I think it's the best, but some sort of top-down expectation to programs as far as these learning outcomes within the majors. People have resisted it, certainly in the sciences. I don't know much about other programs. I remember Annie saying a few years ago how our biology students, if they were really careful, could get all the way to senior seminar without having to write a major paper. Now, the marine science students couldn't get away with that. But I know we have lots of classes where there isn't much writing. Some have heavy data analysis. You know, we're fortunate that some of our labs are restrictive sizes, and that allows us to do more writing because it takes a lot of time. But that's something that we're going to wind up across the curriculum if we're going to expect the majors courses to do this. If you got a class of 40, it's tough to have too many really complex writing assignments. But that has been a problem. People, hey, I've got my academic freedom, you can't tell me what I'm doing, and I'm doing it the way I want to do. But there needs to be some accountability to programs, and that has to come from above the program. So I don't know what that mechanism is.
Program assessment is usually the way in which it's done. Peer review is the only thing that's going to work on people who say, you can't bother me, I have academic freedom to teach my own course behind a locked door. Teaching is not pornography. You can watch it, it's okay.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, you are going to the last piece. But I think it's very important.
I was going to say teaching is like pornography, you know when you see it.
Okay.
Well, that's the Supreme Court
That's
definition,
the
right?
yeah. Moving on.
Can you share with us, going back to Serge's statement before, how invested or how important is the Gen Ed to your level?
Let me just speak crudely financially for the institution, because one of the things we're supposed to do is make sure there's enough money to do all the things that we would like to do. As long as we continue to have a 39% six-year graduation rate and tuition that's about 2/3 of what it should be, we're going to be broke. If we change those two numbers, we're fine. Anything that impacts on that student graduation rate in particular has to be of the utmost strategic importance for the survival of this institution. And because I will predict WASC's visit next time will not be like the WASC visit last time. Their emphasis on graduation rates 2 years from now will be the squared of what it is today. So we have to be prepared to show how we're looking at all of these things together. And I said to the trustees and others, if we change the two numbers, we just got our iPads comparison results today, and it shows that we're at 39%. Our peer group is over 60% in terms of six-year graduation rates. If we do that and we manage to place our tuition around the level of the schools that are around us, that's another 30 or 40 million a year in the budget. At that point in time, we can talk a lot of different things. But at the moment, what we've tried to do is keep things on a very cheap model where we won't give you much, and you don't ask for much, and we won't charge you much. And we need to be in a better value proposition. By that, I don't mean we need to be an expensive institution. We don't. But we're so far behind our peer groups that it's no wonder that in a very high cost of living area we're starting.
But it seems like the answer to that is pretty straightforward. You have a gen ed that they can get through in 2 years, and you have majors that they can finish in another 2 years. And so the onus is on us creating a gen ed that can be finished in 2 years, and the programs have to create majors that can be finished in 2 years.
No. Gen Ed should not be finished in 2 years. You have to be really careful. I think there was a myth in that Gen Ed equaled an associate's degree. So general education basically is a core, that you want, your students to have by the time they graduate. And so you have to be really careful, because I think that's what led to a lot of the bloating around Gen Ed.
And
I don't know. I read through American University, and they're very specific about the gen ed takes 2 years. It's designed that way specifically. They say it flat out verbatim.
I think different schools have different setups for their general education program. Some will actually encourage courses throughout their 4 years, but think of it more as a core, and that your major covers your core. But it could be only in the first couple years. It could be throughout your 4 years, but just be careful about 2 years is the conversation around 2 years, because people will actually hear 2 years worth of coursework.
Well, why? We have to be careful about 2 years, but not careful about 4 years?
Well,
No, just what you're saying, I think, that you don't have to go through your gen ed in the first 2 years. There was this understanding that you do gen ed first, then your major, and that's actually not correct, because if I'm a science major, I need to start my science major right away if I'm actually going to graduate in 4 years.
If you know you're a science major to start.
That's right.
Many students don't.
Right, but usually you will start students with your math, your writing. Most of our students actually start with developmental math, developmental writing, and then they will probably start with some gen ed. They'll start with some major requirements. So all of that kind of goes together in their first year. But just being really conscientious that it's how the faculty want to create their general education program, but it does not necessarily have to finish within 2 years.
Well, I didn't mean to be deterministic, but the total sum of gen ed, regardless of whether you take it in the first 2 years or over 4 years, has to be 2 years. And the total sum of your major, whether you take it in the first over the 4 years or 2 years, has to be 2 years. That they add up to 4 years, right? I mean,
As
You
long
don't
as
really
you
need
leave
that,
some-
because you're talking about too many credits. 60
Yeah.
credits is 2 years.
Because then what about
we're not gonna have
unrestricted
it.
Yeah,
electives?
it's not, yeah.
So gen ed isn't gonna really equal 2 years worth of.
Eliminates all the electives.
Well, yeah, and help me out here. If you do writing across the curriculum or ethics across the curriculum, and some of those credits are really in a person's major alpha, that can go 4 years, and you still have you haven't used too many credits in a certain way in doing that. You still have a rather smallish number of exclusively gen ed courses.
Let me rephrase the question differently, because what I hear the president saying is that we've got this 6-year problem, right? It takes students 6 years to get out of here. Yes?
Well, the rate I gave you is the fraction who graduate in 6 years or less.
But then he leaves.
Well, that's another issue altogether. But so I'm trying to get my head around the 6-year issue. So is what we want them to do is get done in 4 years. That's more of them to get done.
We want to make it possible for them to get out in 4 years. But one thing to remember here is we also need a curriculum with a good deal of flexibility, because the incoming freshman, the incoming first-time, full-time freshman is not the majority population. We really have to look at things a little differently. It might pay to look at gen ed more as some places call it the spine, that there are some things if you start off here as a freshman you have to do. But there are some things, a lot of institutions include a capstone seminar or a capstone research project as part of gen ed. That one's likely to be conducted inside the discipline, but it's a requirement of the program. I would say in general, it's a good idea to look at the number of years and number of credit hours in the degree and make sure you've got enough flexibility. But I encourage something like the 3 model of the Venn diagram, so rather than just
So
2.
it works at 120 credits.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is you really want to give students a chance to go study something they've never seen before. I mean, this is where the interdisciplinary courses often find a real role, or study abroad, or an internship, or a service learning
Research with faculty.
Research, yeah. So you want to leave some room for that kind of, it's not dictated by the major and it's not dictated by Gen Ed purely. There's room for some intellectual decision-making by the student. So,
Sure, I get it. I mean, maybe I'm just too enamored by this AU brochure that just is so sexy. I can't stand it. If we could produce something like this, I would think that we were.
Well,
really
but even if you're
casting
looking,
the eye on the Pacific.
even
Yeah,
if you're
no,
looking at it
it's a
at
very
American
good
University, they're really looking at a quarter, not 2 years. So their Gen Ed is about a quarter of what they're expecting a student to have for their bachelor's degree.
They say 2 years in here, but maybe.
I think that's an amount of time that they want you to complete it.
Yeah.
But in the sense of how many credits it takes up, yeah.
Well, it's 30 credits, and then you have these wild card courses as well.
Then just math and writing, yeah.
Credits,
Yeah.
but-
yeah.
But the idea is if we can get this to work in this sort of 120 credit system, then it'll help us grow the percentage of people getting out of here in 4 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, the other thing, I just remembered, I probably shouldn't say this, but we found worked really well at Butler was that we put a little fund away for people who were developing new courses
Yeah.
or revising old ones.
Yeah.
And even if it's just a few $100s, it's enough to be able to buy a couple of CDs or some reference material that you need to make the course work. So
Some seed money.
Well,
that's
I mean,
fine.
we
Little
do
bit of
have
seed money.
the teaching enhancement grant, you know. That's,
How many of those do we have?
I mean, what do we have, what, $40,000 in teaching enhancement grant? I don't know how much it is, but it's for, at least that's what it was when we did it a while back. I don't know what.
We just have it for the first time this semester after like 5
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
wasn't it canceled for a long time?
Yeah, it was gone for a long time, but that was the idea behind it, was to create teaching innovation and to allow faculty course releases and other, you know, other kinds of.
Or what I think we were getting at, because there's really two groups that we have to be really seriously concerned about for retention. Our statistics in the IPEDS system of data are the first-time full-time freshmen, and we will be graded according to our performance on that subset of students. However, the big initiative that's coming out from WASC for 2013 is going to require every single school in the WASC region to do a very comprehensive analysis of its enrollment and retention statistics, opportunities, challenges. They say they're going to put more weight in the narrative than actually in the data alone, and that's where we go talk about these transfer students, these students who come in at either the second year or the third year. What are we doing for them and with them? And they become our graduates, and so that's a real opportunity. Both groups are serious opportunity groups, but they're different. That's why I really like that idea of a second year common course of some kind, because I think that we've really let down our transfer students in terms of some binding their engagement into being part of the curriculum here. And just a third point is that students, we do have some evidence that students are more likely to finish in a timely manner if they know their major when they come in. That doesn't mean you coerce them into a major in their freshman year. It means you help students in their first year to find out what they might want to do, so that when they declare a major, then they get into those science courses or the psychology courses or whatever early. And you don't want to bind them into some set of gen ed things that isn't in anything in their major, because they need to get turned on to what they're going to be committed to.
On the good news on the graduation side, there are a couple of other numbers. One is the retention rate, freshman and sophomore, which isn't great. We're 69% on that. It should be quite a bit higher. But there's a third number that institutional research puts out, which I think is a really interesting one, which is what is the percentage of students who re-enroll, who are eligible to re-enroll? In other words, didn't graduate and were eligible. This year we went from last year's 80% to 81%. Now that sounds a lot more attractive And it's probably because we're taking in quite a lot of transfer students who are more likely to graduate with us. So some parts of the way we look different to other institutions should be interpreted carefully, because we get more transfer and international students. As a result, we've got a lower unfunded discount rate and a higher overall graduation rate than your first-time freshman would suggest. So we're beginning to look more like what will be a traditional urban university than a traditional liberal arts college, where you would go to your first-time freshman. This overall rate of people who re-enroll who are eligible is actually a very interesting number.
So,
Who was that first?
I don't think we always do a good job of taking care of our transfers. I've been finding in the last couple of years in one particular course to reserve slots for Carroll College transfers. We have a matriculation with Carroll College in Milwaukee. And they get to register way after everybody else. So courses fill and courses close. And that can put them back. That can delay their graduation. That can interfere with their progression. And other things we don't seem to have is we don't have a system of faculty mentoring. We don't have faculty advisors, but we try to. The university has done things to try to get students and faculty together, but I don't think, at least from my perspective, very effectively. We've had proposals in the past for mentoring and getting advising, is because these students come in, transfer. Sometimes they're not dealt with as well as they should be with their transfer credits, and I've helped students with that. So that's a
Our rhetoric even is the rhetoric of the 18-year-old coming into college. So a lot of our systems were not set up in recognition of the fact that this institution is not like a lot of others. It's like a lot of urban institutions, but it's not like a lot of groups that are in our reference group with IPIDs.
Advising responsibilities have been written into the new handbook, the draft of the new handbook, so that is something that will change.
And in fact, the advising, professional advisors we have now, there's change going on within there. We'll be coming up with a proposal for a embedded advisor within the programs system that will interact more with the faculty. I think that's going to help a lot.
If you look at the big fat book by Pascarella and Terenzini on what works in college, I don't think the basic research has changed much. If you want students to persist in college, the two most important issues are how much time did students get to spend with faculty members talking about their academic program, and how much time did students get with faculty members talking about their career and life. Those are the two most important driving elements in this. So one of the other things we haven't done a good job of is providing offices and meeting spaces to make it very easy for faculty and students to join together. So that's another area we've got to push. But looking after the transfer students, I think if maybe we can get a little flow model to show you where we get the students from and where they plug into our curriculum. I was surprised at first because I kept looking at the 6-year graduation rate. It was a while before I realized I'm only looking at one small piece.
That's right.
I think we will be required, the federal government wants to see more tracking of transfer students, so we will have to talk about whether the law school also.
I think that aggregate rate doesn't that percent who re-enroll of all eligible students. Isn't that sort of the
Well, that's less than the number that Les made up?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, you make it up.
Literally or that's why it's so high.
He made up the metric.
I think
he made up the metric. That's a good. I thought it was.
That's an internal metric that we.
Yeah, but I
But
think that's a good metric.
No, I
to
think
strive.
I think there's three different pieces. One is the full-time, first-time freshman retention.
Yeah.
The second is your university who's coming back. But there's another area which is what is the difference between your sophomore transfer versus your junior transfer.
Yeah.
And so that's some of the stuff we need to clean up internally so that we can better assess within their own cohorts around retention and success patterns.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think the number that the methodology that Les is using is helpful because it looks at overall retention versus just the sliver.
It seems to me that the whole discourse needs to shift from the gen ed as a burden to retention to the gen ed as the solution to
Yeah,
retention.
yeah. I think, you know the faculty in the departments will look after the major, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just inbred to all of us.
Yep.
I'd know that if I had one. But
I know, yeah, same here, yeah, we're just the homeless academics, I understand. But there are more of us than there are most people in other disciplines who have a department, so, we may be cockroaches, but tough ones. But, I do think we have to turn that around and say, that should be the basic expression of your institutional values. I mean, I would like to see something that's got a little more Hawaii in it than I see in this.
Right.
We did add that just to let you know in our purpose statement where we actually talk about the Hawaii cultural context.
Yeah.
Specifically.
And I'd like to see it much more worked in for our overseas study abroad students who come in. It's a shame you come from Austria and spend a semester studying accounting, not that it's not a great feeling, without also studying sculpture at the same time.
I don't mean to press this, but it's kind of critical in our process.
You want me to leave now?
No, it's timeline. I know you mentioned the 14 months. Were you being facetious, or were you serious because of the strategic plan and what's actually
Well,
happening? with
I
the
don't
whole
think Gen Ed
loss?
revision gets better when it takes longer.
The last one took
that was a cagey answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant experimentation with what works. So if you do see another model that looks really interesting and looks as if it would work with some minor modifications, I'd take another model that another institution spent 10 years fighting over and came up with a good answer and looked to modify that, because every year lost, there's another class of students who didn't get that advantage. I mean, we cleaned up the faculty handbook to where we are today. I know it's still a draft, much faster than people normally get through that kind of thing, because I think there's goodwill in the institution.
I have a model. You want me to sketch it out for you?
Any more questions? Everyone's good?
I think the goodwill centers on the students, and that's what the Gen Ed is for. Is we should be doing what is absolutely the best thing for the student, not necessarily the best for our department or our enrollment patterns. And if we do the right thing for the student, it'll be the right thing for us.
That's what St. Andrews priority focuses on, and we had a long conversation with the faculty when we were there on our field trip. And they said that they make it student-centered, so when everyone starts complaining about it so much work and whatnot, they go back to that.
When
And their
David
outcomes,
lunches on it.
and their outcomes are amazing. They have such great outcomes.
My students love it when I launch.
I have a question about shared governance decision-making, which is that it has been in the WASC standards since back in 2000 that these core competencies matter. They just have not leaned on us, and we have worked around it by saying they were in the program, learning outcomes, blah, blah, blah. So now we have these core competencies. We know what they are, and we have the option of either putting them under the umbrella of Gen Ed, so that when the Gen Ed renewal goes to the faculty assembly, it gets voted through along with those core competencies, or a different, it could be a parallel. I mean, it is in the WASC standards that the institution should have, they call it institutional learning outcomes, and then what they're specific about is these core competencies. Would we take those, and would it be our job as the Gen Ed groups to worry about those core competencies and take them through the process of the faculty assembly review and approval? It just strikes me it would be easier if we embedded them under this larger umbrella of Gen Ed, so that when the thing goes through, the faculty get to see the whole picture, get to respond to the whole picture, have participated in the whole picture, and then the decision-making is a commitment to a big picture.
I think if you go to the faculty with ill-defined definitions of things like written communication, they're going to ask what you mean. by it.
Well, I don't mean
come
to
back.
go with that. I'm not talking about ill-defined definitions. You know that.
I know, but that's the way to look at it until they see the thing fleshed out,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Well, we could flesh it out either way. I'm just raising the question of whether embedding it under the umbrella of Gen Ed is a better way to give the faculty the opportunity to respond and interact and approve it, and then it's all done.
But that'll only happen if
That
you
actually-
educate us in
Well,
those core competencies.
That actually
But-
was discussed.
Well, but the only thing is to just be careful, because the core competencies for a bachelor's degree may not necessarily be met by the Gen Ed requirements. So just to
Yeah.
understand the balance of that.
Yeah. I think that the other place that these core competencies need to be embedded is in the disciplines. And I think the program review should be paying attention to what extent we're pursuing those same core competencies through the academic majors as well.
Well, my experience working with faculty groups is that no one ever came along and said, you have to have these. So programs that even
I don't know
did do
anything about
program review, which many didn't, did their program reviews and didn't have those core competencies. And nobody said they had to have them, so they just didn't do it. And I'm trying to think about shared governance being a kind of a way that we all together say, as the shared authority, this is how we're going to function in a curriculum model for the future. And if they don't belong under Gen Ed,
Or if you
They
need
still
Andy
need
to say it, we'll do it.
Did you give us a handout on that, Bowie?
Probably.
Yes, I did. I handed out the things that we got from WASC at the last meeting, which is one of the reasons why, if you look at the mission that we did, on the bottom, I have the core competencies down below.
Oh, yeah.
And that we had discussed looking at the three, because in 2014 or 13 or whatever they come and look at it, they want us to have at least 2015.
Oh, I see.
We fall under group 2. I think I
Yeah.
talked about that too, guys, as well,
Yeah.
at the last meeting.
We don't have a choice on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, some things we don't have a choice on answering, right? The law says we're gonna do that, so in
Yes.
fact,
Yes.
I don't think that it's, this, we go back to our academic freedom versus this is a requirement of what we have to do for our accreditation. Now, the three that we have to come up with before 2015, that's way before. This group is not gonna have a new Gen Ed before we have to make the decision on what three core competencies we need to work toward demonstrating we
They already
can
picked
have them, can assess them.
They already picked.
Yeah.
They picked, WASC picked them.
Picked them for us?
They picked
Yeah.
5 for everybody, they
Yeah.
didn't say which
Yeah.
3.
Yeah, they, yes, so then,
and the three are,
The three that we discussed in the working group were written, oral communication, and critical
he said
thinking.
WASC picked them. What did WASC say?
No,
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 They picked the 5.
they picked the 5.
They have the
Oh,
five.
No, I know
the five,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. And then we have to demonstrate 3 of them in our assessing process.
And I don't think we'll have a new Gen Ed before we even come up with those three, is what I'm saying.
The timeline goal that I talked about in our strategic process for both groups is 2014. That's our goal.
We're gonna need to decide on what three core competencies.
We're doing that right
in a
now.
couple of months, right?
Yeah.
Well, the question then still comes back to, are they under Gen Ed or not? See? Because, because,
They have to be across the institution,
yes,
it's not
but
just Gen
if you're
Ed.
assessing them at a say, beginning of senior year level, then you won't have Gen Ed courses probably across the board that you can go to unless we instead adopt some kind of an assessment test, which is an option. Because they've had some discussion
I
about.
think we can make the case that if they're represented in the academic major and they're represented in Gen Ed, that's all we need.
Yes, if they are, we could make that case.
Yeah.
I don't
We're
think
not
that
gonna have
would
a
be
problem with
difficult.
2 out of the 3. The oral communication could be an issue. But-
And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing the Gen Ed pilot, assessment pilot, that Andy and I and Rob Borowski worked together last year, and then we continued it this semester, and we're looking specifically at writing effectiveness as well as critical thinking. We're using a particular rubric, so instead of something like a CLA, we're doing critical thinking analysis. So that's underway right now
Mhm.
while we're doing all this stuff, just because I'm thinking ahead about what WASC wants for us. So.
I must say, I don't think the oral communication ought to be allowed to be barrier, because I think every student needs
Yeah.
to have it.
No, I
know
agree.
there's been some
I agree. I
history
think
in
it's
the
gonna be
past,
more,
but-
I think it's gonna be more difficult for us to meet that in the Gen Ed. because it hasn't been. Maybe it won't be, but
There are good models for speaking across the curriculum, for
Yeah.
example, that do that fairly well. So I think if we beg and borrow a little bit from some other institutions and don't try to create everything de novo, we'll probably get there a lot faster.
One of the arguments I'm going to make, I haven't really made it to our committee yet, is that one of the critical skills of the 21st century is spatial knowledge. How do you feel about that?
If they've got the written, the critical thinking and the oral skills, I'd be willing to tackle it under quantitative reasoning. Because I think in large part, that's where it shows up. That's where interpreting and having to interpret a lot of things in 2 and 3 dimensions that we're not as used to. And young people have a different way of seeing some of those objects, portraying them and handling them. In pre-GIS days, there were a lot of things we just couldn't handle that I think we do now have to handle. But I wouldn't want to get into too many kinds of multiple intelligences, because then we could get emotional intelligence, spatial intelligence. There's a whole raft of them. I think it's an important skill. I think it's a good skill to teach.
Anyone else? We have 5 more minutes, no? Okay.
Well, I want to thank all of you in advance. I know you've put a lot of thought into this already. There's a lot more to do, but this is critically important, strategically important work for this institution at this point.
Thank you for coming.
Anytime.
We may have a follow-up next semester.
Let's do it. No, I'm happy to. Happy to.
By
This
then,
is important.
our next steps are to bring a few models together and then start working on that. Like I said, something similar to what we already have, middle ground, and something very creative. So we may want to do that.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me talk to you.
Thank you.